Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to the 31st of October meeting of Cabinet. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones or electronic device on silent if they have one near them, and not place papers or electronic devices between themselves and the microphones. Please would remote participants mute microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and save bandwidth to prevent loss of connection. Members of the Council joining us remotely should leave cameras on. Officers leave cameras on only for the agenda item you're speaking. After each item has been presented, I would invite members present in the room to ask the first questions. Those members joining us remotely will then be invited to speak, and they should indicate their wish to do so by using the raise your hand facility. Only those members of Cabinet present in the room will be making the decisions. I will confirm the result verbally for the benefit of those watching on the webcast. So, agenda item 1, to resolve the minutes of the last meeting to be confirmed as a correct record of proceedings, and they will be signed by me. Do you agree? Thank you. You're welcome. Are there any apologies for absence, Lisa? Yes, Councillor J1. Item 3. Any additional items, Malcolm?
There are none, Chair.
And any urgent items?
There are none, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Disclosure of interests. Members, please speak clearly if you have a personal and prejudicial, and say the agenda item it refers to. Members with a personal and prejudicial interest will be asked to temporarily leave the meeting at the start of the item. Members will be invited to rejoin the meeting when the item is finished. I believe Councillor Barnes did declare.
Yes, I need to declare that I am a director of the Lords District Council Housing Company. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, John. That's noted. So we can go into the first item, item 6, which is the procurement strategy update report of Tony Baden, Chief Finance Officer.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. First thing I'd like to do is introduce Kathy Nelson and Stephen Bottomley from Wilton District Council Procurement Hub, and they will take members through the report in a bit more detail in a few seconds. I'd very much like to thank them for taking the time to come along tonight. It's very helpful, much appreciated. Excuse me. So the report is just an update on the strategy, on the procurement strategy. It contains a bit of information about procurement activity during the financial year to date and how we're performing against some of the key performance indicators within that strategy. So if I may, Chair, I'm going to hand over now to Kathy, and Kathy will hopefully take members through this and provide them a bit more information on the report. And sorry, should just say the report is for noting, of course.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you. So, I'm Kathy Nelson, Manager of East Sussex Procurement Hub. Colleague Stephen Bottomley, who's my Senior Procurement Business Partner now. Just to give an update on how we've done up until now, so from April to date, really. So currently we're looking on target to achieve our savings of 167,000 by already getting to 124,000, or just over that, which is 1.12%. Currently, it's difficult to give an exact savings until we get the spend data through, which we don't get until June next year. And then once we've got that data, the next report I can update you on what we did actually save. So that figure is it's our best estimate at this time, which is good. We are starting a training programme now, because we appreciate people are coming back into the office. There's been a bit of a knowledge gap in procurement. So what we've decided to do is do training in a slightly different way. Normally we'd do it council-wide and ask people to attend, but we want to do it by service area and individual departments, so that we can tailor it to those people and the actual procurements they're doing, so that we can drill down into what they actually need to know about procurement, because there's all sorts of different levels. We recently did a very successful training session with the strategic projects team, and now they're working with us quite closely on how they put their procurements together, which is very positive. With regards to policy and scope and obtaining social value, we're currently we are achieving our social value target of including it in all above threshold procurements, and these are procurements that are above 170,000 or more for goods and services and 4.2 million for construction. What we're now going to work on for the rest of the year is how we monitor that and how we actually put those, what we're being told are going to be offered into practice, and how we actually deliver or make sure that it's being delivered for the council. We are also developing a sustainable procurement policy, which is a cross-council policy with other regeneration and sustainability officers in Hastings, Wilden, Lewis and Eastbourne, and of course Rother. And what we hope to achieve by that is to have a climate change strategy for how we actually meet the carbon net zero targets that we've agreed to. We hope to have a bit more information on that in the next couple of months. And then once we've got that strategy through, that's when we can actually meet our target number 6 of completing the KPI, and how we actually bring that into the staff and how we actually use that and get everyone to understand what social value is and how we're going to deliver it. With regards to local SMEs and micro businesses, I'm really pleased to report that you actually have a 22.8% increase in engagement with SMEs and local businesses from the previous year. However, I do have to caveat that with the joint waste being novated to Wilden District Council, because that was a huge chunk of spend that has moved. That was non-local spend. So we'll find a new benchmark, but hopefully we will still be able to meet our 5% increase year on year. And we're looking to engage more with small medium enterprises by doing an Understand the Buyer event. Now we're out of COVID and we can actually work closely with people and have in-person meetings. We'd like to actually have an event somewhere and get the buyers to come in and meet us and talk to us about procurement. There are some big changes next year with legislation in procurement, and it's always good to actually explain that to the contractors and the suppliers. And you best do that by meeting face to face. But because of how we work now, hopefully we'll be able to do it in a hybrid so that we can engage with more people. And then in terms of forward planning, we have our annual procurement programme, which we're going to start working on this month, or next month, sorry, apologies, where that's to inform how we go forward with procurements, to have a plan in place for what we're going to do next year for you, and who we need to engage with on that. And as you can see within Appendix A, we have already achieved quite a lot of procurements this year. We've completed, in the first 2 quarters of the year, we had completed 9 procurements, 4 of which, and then an additional 4 are still in progress or partially complete, and hopefully we'll have them done in the next, few weeks really. And then we have a lot coming up in the next few months with ongoing procurements, and all which we hope to achieve by the end of March this year. I think that's pretty much it. But thank you.
Yep. Thank you for that, Kathy. Are there any questions or any points I need to clarify from the report? Councillor Terry Byrne.
Thank you. This is maybe slightly off to one side. It's not unknown for when we're when members are talking to businesses or SMEs or even larger organisations, that they will tell us that they've found a particularly economic way of procuring particular materials or services or whatever. How would a member feed that in? Where would it be appropriate to bring it to somebody's attention and say, are you going to look at this?
I'm happy for people to come to me direct and talk to me about something if they've got of a particular interest. Contractors are free to actually engage with us and talk to us. We have email, phone, but yeah, we engage quite readily with contractors, and we do a lot of soft market testing these days so that we go out to the market before we procure and find out what is new out there in commercial terms for them.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank Thank you. Councillor Projo.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cathy. Good to hear about the climate change and aspects of the work that's going to be incorporated. And it'd be good to hear when you get that, to hear more about it. We're just starting on a project with Village Halls, which is about solar panels and energy reduction in village halls, which is a great project. But we recently had this described in our town and parish conference. And one question that came out of that was, from the parishes, is it possible to have a list of approved suppliers for solar panels, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, all those sort of things?
We don't currently have approved supplier list purely because if we're approving them and saying that we agree or we recommend them, then actually that puts an onus on the council to, if anything goes wrong, it could come back to your recommendation, and that's quite a high risk, especially in today's climate. So we're happy to actually pass lists on to people or to the parish councils of possible opportunities that they can use suppliers, but we wouldn't actually say they've been approved because that would suggest that we've actually done due diligence or checked insurances and made sure they're fit for purpose.
Just thank you for that, and I understand what you're saying. So if parishes want a list, can we do it on their behalf and then distribute it?
I can give you a list of contractors from our supplier database that we have. That could be a possibility, but I couldn't, unless I've actually been asked to do full due diligence on them and put them through a procurement process, I couldn't actually say that I've recommended them. It would just be
Okay. Did you want to make a comment at this stage, Tony?
Yes, if I may, Chair. I'm sorry, I'm a bit late, and I'm going to make it now before I forget it. Just picking up on Councillor Burns' point about going straight to the procurement hub, could I ask that if there are any situations like that, they come through Rother officers first, please? Because the reason I say that is we are responsible for Rother's procurement. That the hub do an absolutely fantastic job for us, but ultimately, in the eyes of the law, it's our responsibility as a council. And we need to be able to monitor that sort of activity. So if I could just ask members to go through Rother officers in the first instance, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Well, thanks for clarifying that, Tony. Thank you. Christine Bayliss.
Yes, I've just got a question actually. Where it says forward-looking to Q3 and Q4, I thought we were going to have a report on the fountains. Looking at the procurement for repairing those at some stage in the next 6 months, and it's not on the list.
I wasn't aware of that, but perhaps Ben could throw some light on it.
Certainly not to a level of procurement where we'd be looking to go out through a procurement at this stage. No.
Oh, are we going to bring back the soft market testing that we've done 2 years ago, before COVID? I think it was done through Joe Powell at the time.
Yeah, well, it can be done if that's what the case. I wasn't aware that had been teed up at this stage, unless that's something that anyone else can. Hazel?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, there was a report done by Joe on the fountains and the various costs involved in what we may or may not do, but it didn't come before us because COVID happened, and I don't know where that report is now. But Councillor Bayliss is quite right. We should be actually resurrecting it and having a look at it.
Perhaps, Joe, you could just enlighten us where we are with that report.
Remember, Joe?
I recall a members' briefing that Malcolm and I called to brief members on an overview of where we had got to date with the fountains, and Deborah and I did some groundworks or initial assessments of it to see how much it might cost to deliver, and an options appraisal. I remember that much, but it would be something we'd probably need to revisit outside of this forum, I think, to understand fully, because it's going back a while now. Ben?
I think just picking up on Joe's point there, maybe it's worth picking it up outside the meeting to see how we can move it forward. If there's a will from members to want to revisit the fountains, then we can look at how best to do that.
Hazel?
Thanks, Ben. I just remember very specifically in that report was a figure of 630,000. And I thought it was a report, actually, that we were looking at, and not just a briefing.
Well, in the absence of anyone sort of confirming that there was a report, it's something that perhaps we should just take away as suggested and have a look at it, because I don't think you get the same value out of 630,000 today, but it's really worth looking at.
I've got a copy of the report if you want it, if anyone wants.
Chair,
That's a good start point.
Chair, if members want to look at it, it's up to agreement of members, but I mean that 630 was a figure I remembered as well, but that was some time ago, and as you say, but as I understood it, it's not repair, it's actually restarting a whole new project, so I think it would need careful looking at.
Okay, well, we'll take that forward, and I'm sure that report will come forward, and perhaps which desk does it go on, Ben?
I think I'll take that one, and me and Deborah will look into what can be done.
Okay, fine, thank you. Paul?
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. My first one is, I'm intrigued to understand how savings are measured, because presumably with large projects, you're dealing with a different project each time, different companies. You're not comparing like with like. So I'm just intrigued by the technicalities of how you come up with your savings figure.
Of course. When we get the spend data, of course, with service contracts, you can actually make an actual judgment on the saving based on what it was costing you before and what it's costing you now. With some contracts, we do use what we call an initial budget number that we're given when we go to procure, when officers come to us, and then we measure that against what the actual contract value was in the end. So it is difficult to do an actual like-for-like savings target, but that's kind of through our industry, that's how it's done and how we measure it. Some are more scientific than others, but we still try and gauge it. If you're paying less money, then you're saving money, basically.
Thank you. My second question is about social value. Last February, Councillor Dixon was appointed as the Cabinet Member for Social Value. Has Councillor Dixon been invited for any training yet?
Perhaps Councillor Dixon could answer that one.
We haven't engaged in training yet because, as I mentioned earlier, there is new legislation coming out, and felt that actually it's due. If it seemed a bit not worth doing the training, we thought if there's new legislation coming, because what we're telling you might all change. So I have delayed that for members a little bit, and that would include social value training. But, I mean, I'm happy to have a discussion if you would like one, Councillor Dixon.
Well, that makes sense. Tony, I think you wanted to make a comment.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, Cathy's just made it for me about the regulations changing shortly, but I think it's incumbent on me to help drive, actually arrange the training. So I'll endeavour to make sure that happens in communication with Cathy. It's not just Councillor Dixon, although as portfolio holder, it's important for him to receive training, but it's training across the council, and as part of the induction process, and we haven't got there yet. We know we are behind with the strategy in that respect. We recognise that, and we are going to work to try and rectify that.
Right, thank you. So this report is just for noting. You'd like to move this report, Kevin?
Yes, Chairman, happy to move the report as printed.
Second.
Those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Are you going to go now, Cathy? Yes? Have you got far to go home?
Eastbourne.
Well.
Thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Okay, no, thank you for your time. Right, we move on to item 7, and this is the report, Rother Health, Wellbeing and Leisure Facility Strategy that was considered by scrutiny on the 17th of October. And Deborah, you're going to talk us through this, or is Rachel going to talk us through it, or are you going to do a duo?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. We're going to do a duo, if that's all right. I'm going to introduce the report and just give a very brief background, and then Rachel's going to present. Rachel Fowler from Strategic Leisure. I can introduce her, and then I'll come back for the recommendations afterwards, if that's all right. So this report outlines the background to the draft Health, Wellbeing and Leisure Facilities Strategy. And as I say, I will hand over to Rachel presently, who's the Managing Director of Strategic Leisure. And we're happy to answer any questions at the end, of course. So paragraphs 1 through to 6 of the report provide some background and refers to a previous project to develop the existing Bexhill Leisure Centre site to incorporate residential housing as well as new leisure facilities. This did not come to fruition due to a number of factors, including the financial pressures brought about by COVID on both the leisure industry and on the council, and also partly that the owners of the drill hall withdrew from the scheme. The leisure industry and the use of leisure facilities by residents both indoors and outdoors experienced many changes during the COVID pandemic years of 20 to 22. And in January 2022, Cabinet agreed these changes needed to be researched and analysed to create a vision and strategy on which to base future leisure facilities. Subsequently, Strategic Leisure Limited, an expert in the leisure industry, was appointed to complete independent and in-depth market research across the district, analyse the results and draft a leisure strategy to support an active and healthy lifestyle for our residents across Rother District now and into the future. Paragraph 7 of the report sets out the scope of the market research and strategy. The full draft Health, Wellbeing and Leisure Facility Strategy can be found at Appendix B in the report, and the executive summary is Appendix A. And then there are 10 appendices to the strategy that evidences the level and depth of market research that forms the foundation of the strategy. It should be noted that alongside this work, RDC Planning Department has been reviewing the current playing pitch and leisure facilities strategy that has a much wider scope across both Rother District and the Borough of Hastings. Paragraph 9 of the report sets out the timetable and process for review, public consultation and final approval of the strategy prior to its adoption. It is important this timetable be met, as underlying the delivery of aspects of these services is the current contract with Freedom Leisure, which expires on the 31st of March 2024. Cabinet are asked to consider the recommendations arising from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held on the 17th of October. And these considerations are that the name of the strategy be changed to Rother Health and Wellbeing, Leisure Facilities Strategy. To reword Key Principle 2 of the strategy to all new provision should be designed to achieve carbon neutrality and be as energy efficient as possible. Sorry, apologies, that's Key Principle 6. I'll go back. Key Principle 2 of the strategy was to reword the council's role is one of deliverer as well as enabler and signposter to opportunities to be physically active. And then finally, approve the health, wellbeing and leisure facilities strategy prior to public consultation. So I'll hand over to Rachel, who's going to give us a brief presentation on the actual strategy itself. Thanks, Rachel.
Good evening, Chairman, members. So, thank you. If we could just move on to the first slide, please, Lisa, that would be great. Thank you. So, I'm not going to read out every single word on these slides, which I'm sure you're going to be pleased about. But just to run through some of the key points. So if we could move to the second slide, please, which sets out the vision for the strategy. And what we've tried to do is to set out here some of the key messages. So the vision, as it states here, is working in partnership to enable provision of good quality, accessible and inclusive leisure for both residents of and visitors to Rother, because of the positive impact being active has on our health and well-being in our place. And we've deliberately used the word place because any future funding for leisure is likely to be focused on place. And if the council did want to look at trying to attract external funding, we thought we should put that word in there now to future-proof the strategy. I think it's important just to point out some of the reasons why the council needs a strategy. It gives you the ability to make decisions against something, which without a strategy, it's difficult to make decisions about investment or development or partnership. Also, very importantly, over a quarter of your residents are not active enough at the moment. And so to encourage them to be more active, we need to have a strategy that sets out what you need to do to facilitate that activity. Also, there are residents in your district who are economically or financially disadvantaged. There's some groups, people with particular needs, for example, and we need to make sure that leisure provision is accessible for everyone and available to everyone. And then also the strategy picks up on the role of partnership moving forward, because the council can't necessarily deliver everything moving forward, and so partnership is key for future delivery. Could you move to the next slide, please? In terms of the shared outcomes from the strategy, we've identified 4 particular areas. So one is active environments, and that's about creating environments that support and facilitate everyday physical activity. So it might be improved walking and cycling routes, which enable things like active travel. So particularly getting inactive people active without them feeling that they've got to get changed to play sport or whatever. Active communities, so that's about supported and developed community assets to increase physical activity levels and build community resilience. So, for example, that could involve partnership working to create outdoor provision, outdoor active environments with your town and parish councils. Healthy individuals, the strategy aims to decrease health inequalities and increase awareness and capability in the inactive population to change lifestyle behaviours. Making people more active will actually take cost out of systems elsewhere, because taking a preventative approach and getting people more active earlier in their lives will actually mean that they're healthier for a longer period of their life. And then partnerships and collaborative working is the 4th key strand, and that's about, as I said before, about improving partnership working, really, to get all providers on the same page, if you like, so everybody's working towards the same outcomes and priorities. In terms of the principles, sorry, Lisa, next page, please, next slide. So in terms of the key principles, we've come up with 7 key principles underpinning the vision for the strategy. I'm not going to read all of them out. I'm just going to pick up on a few. I think it's important to highlight the role of carbon neutrality moving forward, and that any new provision should be designed to embrace green energy and new technologies to reduce the production of carbon. Some of you may know that leisure centres are some of the worst producers of carbon, and if you improve plant and the condition of plant in a leisure centre, that can contribute significantly to achieving carbon neutral targets. I think it's important to stress that moving forward, the council's role should be one of an enabler and signposter, as opposed to a direct deliverer of everything. And also that this strategy looks at the opportunities to improve and promote existing infrastructure. So, for example, facilities on school sites, which may or may not be open to the community. You have got some facilities on education sites in the district which aren't open for the number of hours that they could be, and some of which aren't open at all. And so working with education as a partner to kind of improve access rather than investing in new provision. So that the strategy is saying that you should explore opportunities for those kind of partnerships before looking at capital investment. And then, very importantly, that the leisure strategy coexists with other key priorities and policies of the Council. Could you move forward, Lisa? The next two slides, hopefully they're not so small you can't read all of it, but this points out some of the key feedback that we achieved from the consultation. And just a few key points, really, is that residents, it came back very clearly that some residents who responded really want to be more active, and this is particularly in the wake of COVID, but actually they haven't done anything about that yet. And so there's some work to do to engage with those who are inactive and facilitate their involvement. So, for example, some of the programmes that are run from Bexhill Leisure Centre at the moment, some of the Walking for Health programmes or walking netball or walking football programmes are the kind of activities that inactive people could get involved in initially and start that journey towards being more active. I think it's important to mention that feedback did state that whilst many people use your existing facilities, there is a desire within the community to see more modern facilities, and particularly a laned swimming pool, outdoor fitness facilities, cafe, improved facilities for those with a disability, and more local gyms and studios. There was also, it was raised quite a few times that people want to see more physical activities for children. Cost was mentioned, it always gets mentioned. Things like people want leisure centres at the end of their street, you know, because they don't want to travel. Those things always come back. So it's about, the strategy aims to kind of balance some of those barriers to participation moving forward. And there's some other points there. I won't read them all out, but if anybody's got any particular questions about the market research, then please, I'm happy to come back to that. Could you move on to the next slide, Lisa, please? In terms of your existing facilities and provision, I think it is important to highlight a few things. Generally, the Council's leisure assets are ageing. Typically, the lifespan of the public facility would be expected to be 30 to 35 years. And your facilities are older than that. But also, so are some of the facilities on education sites. You have limited access to laned swimming pools at the moment, which is important for Learn to Swim. You don't have any learner pool in the district at the moment. And the reason I'm highlighting that is you're a coastal authority and Learning to Swim is really important. Bexhill Leisure Pool is a well-used pool, but although it has lanes marked out in it, it's quite difficult to use because it is a leisure pool. And then other things just to highlight about swimming is that there is actually an undersupply of swimming pools at the moment to meet your both current and future demand. A couple of other things to highlight, really. The future role of dual-use sites. The Council has partnerships and relationships with a number of dual-use sites, but every relationship is different and every partnership arrangement is different. So perhaps there's some opportunities to kind of bring those together so that there's some commonalities between those arrangements moving forward, because they are well-used facilities in the local area. And then just in terms of sports halls, at the moment there is sufficient provision in the district, and that will continue into the future. But you can't afford to lose any of the existing sports hall facilities that you have unless new ones are built. So there's some recommendations in the strategy about working with education sites. So if a new school is built, for example, there should be a planning condition about having community access to those on-site facilities. And then, very importantly, and what came back a lot through the consultation, is the development or the opportunity to develop increased use of open space and outdoor spaces, both for informal and formal activities. So things like green gyms or activities out in the open air, a lot of that has come from COVID, but a lot of people have stuck with that, and that was very clear coming back from your consultation. Next slide, Lisa. So the aim of developing this strategy is to contribute to improved quality of life for other residents and visitors, and facilitate provision of good quality opportunities to be physically active on a regular basis. And the role of Rother District Council should be one of coordinating, facilitating and enabling, and in some cases delivering opportunities, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, things like the Active Rother programme. In terms of the objectives, next slide, sorry Lisa, so the objective of the strategy is to provide the maximum access to residents for various health, leisure and wellbeing activities in which they wish to engage, and with specific regard to those living in deprived circumstances or have disabilities or life-limiting conditions. And access to these services must address factors like affordability and to find a balance between the needs of Bexhill and rural residents. And so we've developed some criteria for assessing developments that we should look at things like accessibility by public transport and encourage alternative forms of transport where possible. So that would pick up things like active travel and walking for health. Any new facility should make a contribution to addressing health inequalities, contribute to the Council's goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2030, and in general, any provision made by the Council should be complementary to that existing in the private sector, so that there isn't competition, because you've got a finite number of residents, both now and into the future, so there's no point everybody providing the same things or the same activities. Next slide, Lisa, please. Thank you. So in terms of strategy implementation, just picked out a few things really which are the highest priorities. One is the development of outdoor facilities, and it's suggested in the strategy that that could be achieved in partnership with your town and parish councils, and there are already some really good examples in the district of where that's happened. There is also a need to consider any cost in investment, because it is significant investing in leisure facilities, but I think some of the historically low user rates that you've got at some of your facilities is to do with the condition and the quality of them, and there is anecdotal evidence in the industry that newer facilities attract more usage. It's also important to highlight that newer facilities would be more advantageous in your next leisure contract when that's procured, because you will attract more interest from the operator market. We also feel that in moving forward through the strategy that there should be an opportunity to reduce the leisure operators' dependency on the council in terms of support moving forward. I know that's very difficult at the moment and it's very sensitive, obviously, with the decision made over Rye Pool, but operators have been through a very difficult period with COVID and now looking at cost of living and energy cost rises. But over a longer period of time, they should become self-sustainable again, without reliance on the council. And then we're also suggesting that where possible, Rother District Council should work across boundaries with neighbouring authorities, because it's impossible to afford similar levels of leisure provision in every single one of the districts and neighbouring authorities, and working collectively and collaboratively could be much more efficient and cost-effective. In terms also of the strategy implementation, the next slide please, Lisa, the recommendation is that Rother, as I said earlier, become a signposter rather than a provider of facilities, that all towns and parishes should be supported with the creation of better outdoor facilities, that you should optimise delivery of available non-swimming dry facilities through joint arrangements with education, for example, and other clubs, local clubs and the third sector, and that where you work in partnership to plan and deliver inclusive and accessible swimming pool facilities, and that overall there's an opportunity to build on promoting and providing infrastructure to increase the use of cycling and walking. So in terms of the next steps, in terms of strategy delivery, as Deborah mentioned, there's going to be some public consultation starting in November. We would report back on that to Overview and Scrutiny in January 23, prior to full council. There's also the opportunity to work with existing partners now to identify some options to open up opportunities in existing facilities, particularly on education sites, and also establish the resources required to deliver your priorities moving forward, and investigate some external funding opportunities. On that last point, Sport England will be announcing a new place fund in January next year. The criteria aren't clear yet, but obviously as soon as we become aware of them, we'll pass them on to Deborah. So.
Thank you, Rachel. So just to finish off and just to emphasise, this is a vision and a strategy for the longer term, over the 10 years plus time, as in the last slide. So I just wanted to emphasise that. So members are asked to approve the draft health, wellbeing and leisure facilities strategy prior to public consultation commencing in November, and taking into account the points raised by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Rachel, for the report, which I think is very thorough. Paul, would you like to make any comments that came from the scrutiny meeting last month?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As you've just heard, excellent report from Rachel and Deborah. Timing ultimately could have been better, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of things there speaking about our facilities. People wanted lane swimming, fully accessible, and everything else. And our meeting coincided sort of 3 or 4 days after the announcement that the Rye Pool was being closed, which happened today. So there's sort of irony in here that you read the report and it says we have an under provision of swimming pools. Well, we do now because we just closed one. It's unfortunate, and you can almost sort of see we're going out to a public consultation. Well, I would probably think you'll get a fair bit from Eastern Rotherham Rye, so, especially mentioning swimming pools. I know it's not on the agenda, but specifically that. But the sort of timing seemed ironic. You'll see the recommendations that we came up with. There was an element of confusion with the Rother Health Wellbeing Leisure Facilities with no little bits in it. And I think that caused a bit of confusion a couple of meetings ago when we were setting up the Health and Wellbeing Task and Finish group. We had 2 cabinet members here sort of saying, oh, we're doing that work already. Well, you're doing the leisure facility bit, not the whole health and wellbeing. And Joe sort of picked it up in my officer briefing. He said, well, why don't we just put a hyphen in it? So it's part of the Rother Health and Wellbeing, and this is a leisure facility strategy. So that seemed a very sensible thing. The committee would prefer, obviously, the council's role as one of deliverer as well as enabler and signposter to opportunities to be physically active. Reword 6, all new provisions should be designed to be carbon neutral, which would be sensible given the way that the council was moving on that. And the last one, just approve wellbeing strategy prior to public consultation. So that's what it is. That will happen, and then it will come back to us in January, I believe. So, but yeah, and that I'll just say with that, these sort of recommendations were cross-party. Everybody was fully unanimous as well, and everybody was happy with the report and the slight amendments we've made. So hopefully that's it, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, Paul, thanks for those comments. Catherine? Yes, by all means. Catherine Field.
Thank you very much. Yes, an interesting report. I was just wondering, is the consultation document going to go to every single education provider in the county or the district? Because, of course, education as a service to the county council doesn't really exist anymore, because many of our schools are academies. There's been talk at Westminster for some months now that all schools will have to become academies, and those academies don't have authority members on their boards. So it's not just one organisation, it's many organisations with which there'll have to be partnership arrangements. And I can foresee that could be quite complicated if they want to engage with us. So I would hope the consultation would go to every single school, because even those which are not academies yet are very autonomous and might have other ideas. there wasn't a lot of talk that I could hear about how we subsidise wet leisure with paid for, yes, dry facilities beyond gyms. There's many other things that can be done in conjunction with a wet facility to help subsidise the cost of running it. I'm also very conscious that this council has just adopted an anti-poverty strategy, and whereas we all know that everybody needs to be fit, going to the gym is outside the range of a great many people, even those who aren't categorised as disadvantaged or poor. Yeah. We also know that being outside does a great deal of good to people's mental health, whatever your economic status. So, yes, indoor facilities are okay, but I think we've got a great asset here in this district outside, and the number of people I see walking along the seafront, some at speed, and there's an argument, I think, for laning the seafront, because we don't all go at the same speed, some of us go quite fast, but the number of people you see using the flat surfaces outside in this district, I think is very encouraging already, and we can build on that. So, yes, I'd be very interested to see what the consultation brings. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, Councillor Jonathan Steinhall.
Thank you. I might speak again later, if I'm allowed. I just wanted to say that a lot of the examples in this report, came from things that are happening in Rother now, and I think one of the very best examples is what Battle has done with their large recreation ground, which provides a whole range of activities for young, old, people of different ability levels. And it sets a very, very good example of the sort of things that can be done. It's unfortunate that the existing facility is a good demonstration of how you don't attract people who perhaps are the ones that you want to attract, because it's been there for 30 years and it still hasn't managed to attract those people who the council would like to support. And that really tells me, and hopefully it tells the council, that we have to do something differently. And I think this strategy works towards that as well, not the least which part of the concept of signposting is that there are a lot of facilities out there. I'm sure Councillor Timpey will probably talk about this, that people don't even know that are there. So we have quite a good job to do, which is not a capital job, but it's not a particularly expensive job to do. And that's just a starting point. It's just unfortunate about the situation with pools nationally at the moment and energy. But the fact is that, we're not going to, the world is not going to stop swimming because there's an energy crisis at the moment. That will rectify itself in time. But one of the most important things is, and we see this, and unfortunately we haven't been involved in this, is the number of leisure centres that have become decarbonised through very large government grants. And I know that we didn't apply for those grants, or I'm not quite sure how that all evolved. But some very good websites were circulated by Adrian Gaylon, showing, in fact, one facility which has achieved no energy usage over the summer period. And I think one of the keys is going to be demonstrating how we can build a facility in time as things settle down for swimming, because that is the one facility that really isn't provided properly by anyone else. And I think we have to be a little bit more ambitious and a bit more visionary about it. It has to be a destination. And I think if you make it that, it will potentially, I hope Rachel might be able to help us in this area, attract significantly greater grants that beyond what we might otherwise achieve with a modest or relatively small local facility. And as Councillor Field said, we have to be much broader in our thinking about how you cross-subsidise that with commercial or other leisure-type activities. And Councillor Coleman in the scrutiny meeting, which I watched and listened to and took a number of points, made a very clear point that a lot of people want to engage in leisure activities or which add to their mental health, which don't necessarily involve running on a running machine. And one of the things that's really been highlighted over the last couple of years, while this has been sort of mulled over, COVID has perhaps given us that opportunity to look at things differently, is the Bexhill Leisure Centre is a fantastic example of how a building starts to become redundant from day one. Because, in the 90s, I was a competition squash player, and Now you don't see any squash courts or hardly anyone playing, but we have squash courts there, saunas, all sorts of things like that. So as soon as you build those very specific sporting activities, they're on the road to redundancy or change. You have pelotons, spinning, all sorts of things, and they attract a need for investment in old facilities. So that's why we end up with redundant facilities. Conversely, in my earlier days, I was a competition swimmer, and I was very lucky because I lived in a country where within 20 minutes of where I lived, there were 3 50-metre pools, 2 25-metre pools, and an indoor pool. And that's probably why Australia always punches above its weight with swimming, because of that. The facilities are there, and it's as simple as that. And one of the reasons we underperform in the UK is because the facilities are not there. And believe it or not, in this wealthy part of the country, although I do recognise we have some real big areas of deprivation, we don't have a 50-metre pool. The closest one is one that's just about to open in Brighton, and that's an outdoor version, or K2 up in Crawley. And I recognise that 50-metre pools haven't been affordable in the past, but I think if you work towards something more ambitious than a destination, there is a real opportunity for Rother to be a destination, as was the concept of the skate park in Sidley. Sorry, that was quite long, wasn't it? Yeah. I didn't plan that in advance. There you go.
Christine, Councillor Davis.
Yes, so thank you. Well, actually, that leads on quite nicely, because I was going to say that I was going to reiterate about the council has invested £1 million in the skate park at Sidley, the improved BMX racing track, the fantastic skate park, and we mustn't forget that is all out of doors, outside. It's got it's all year round in good weather. But it's now attracting, competition BMXers from across the southeast. Anyone who went to the opening event would have been, really impressed. There were people there from all over who'd gone into Bexhill railway station and then somehow worked out how to get from Bexhill railway station to Sidley Recreation Ground. But it is something we should be really, really proud of as council. That it's been delivered. As the sort of lead member for economic development and regeneration, I would say that we need to be really careful about making sure that we don't crowd out the private sector. There are ward in central Bexhill and around Rother that are running gyms and leisure type facilities, and the sort of impact, if you like, of COVID on. I was a member of the Bexhill Leisure Centre just before COVID struck. I'm no longer a member of the Bexhill Leisure Centre. My family have given up their membership of Bexhill Leisure Centre. We've actually bought equipment which we use at home, or we get involved in outdoor activities. And one of the most, I think it brings a joy to my heart really, is the Groove leisure activities, which takes place on Bexhill Seafront. I think once or twice a week, where it's like silent disco, but everyone's doing exercises. And on a low tide, they go out on the sand, or they're on the promenade, and it is really amazing to see. And it's those sorts of things, I think, that we need to facilitate. One thing I was going to say or ask about is the idea of the sort of leisure facilities that we want to, that maybe the public will want us to build. And I wondered whether there is scope as an alternative approach would be to identify some land, maybe, for example, on where the current leisure centre is, to say, look, if you want to build a state-of-the-art gym and facilities, a private business can come in. We would subsidise some usage for that, so that we would make it accessible for, say, some of our residents on lower incomes. But we actually allocate that land out, make a plan, in the planning permission, make it part of the conditions for the planning that it is accessible. And I just wondered if there were other examples of that taking place around the country, as opposed to the council. And I mean, I think we were £8 million, £8 million short when we were, I think we took over the council and... Sorry? £8.8 million we were short in terms of raising the finance to build our own leisure centre, whether there are alternative options. Perhaps Rachel might be able to say something about those.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Councillor Sue Prosher.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel and Deborah, for the work you've done. Just two questions, really. In our local plan, we have two big themes. One is green to the core, and the other is ageing well. And those are sort of golden threads through all our work now. And Lorna, Deputy Chief Executive, and I were on a really, really good conference and follow-up to the HARE project, which is Healthy Ageing Through Innovation in Rural Europe, an amazing project which is now being built upon. So we now have strategies, and I welcome what Councillor Osborne's group's scrutiny said about making it health and well-being. And I really welcome the thoughts about it. I was pictured John Barnes doing the boogie dancing. It's Councillor Barnes. I like the idea that we actually begin to think of leisure as broader. And even Councillor Coleman was talking about the arts and all those activities that contribute to health and well-being. And so I think I like the broad aspect, but I don't know whether it needs an action point, and I'll look to Lorna Ford for this, because we now have our anti-poverty strategy and the work being done by our local strategic partnership, which is also broadening out to health and well-being. So how we get these strategies as a coherent whole, which addresses probably the next corporate plan. So it would be good to actually look at that. And really look forward to the consultation, because I think there are users out there who actually have some really good ideas, thinking more broadly. So I hope the consultation allows people to think of something bigger. And yes, it's clear that everybody wants lane swimming. And, no, you don't.
51%.
Well, the top one was lane swimming. So that probably in the end is something going to be an ambition. Whether it's 50 metres is another question. But one of the other things that came out of the HARE project, which is, as you say, quite easy to do, is that older people would like to do more physical activity. They really would, but they don't know where to go. They don't know whether it's appropriate. They don't know what clothes to wear, whether it'd be all right for them to go. So people need supporting. Older people need supporting where to go. And so that's an aspect as well.
Chairman?
Yes, there's several people with hands up here, John. I'll come back to you on that.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Kevin Dixon. Kevin?
Thank you, Chairman. And I don't want to be the party pooper in all this, of course, but strategies are all well and good, and setting expectations up and asking people what they want is all well and good. But I'm here to remind everyone that we don't have a blank cheque, and anything here that we decide and we want has to be paid for. In fact, we haven't got any blank cheques, we haven't got any cheques at all. And that's the situation we are. So I think there is an element of managing expectation within all this, that what everyone wants is one thing, what Rother can provide and afford is completely a different one. And certainly with swimming, any swimming pool has to be subsidised from somewhere. There's no swimming pool that can make a profit on its own or cover its costs. And that is very important to note, that it might be what someone wants, but if everyone's got to pay the true cost for a swim, that isn't going to happen. And I just think that when we go to consultation, we must manage expectations. Otherwise, the hair will be set running. It's something that we won't be able to stop.
Yeah, I think the whole purpose of this is actually to move it to a consultation. Once we've agreed, we're not making any decisions tonight about what's going to look like. It's just a case of bringing all this work together so that the residents can look at this and people can come back, and community partners. Catherine, yes.
Sorry. Yes, thank you. I forgot to say something in my first go. Point number 3 says all new provisions should be designed to achieve carbon neutrality and be as energy efficient as possible. Now, I think we all know that this whole field of activity is moving ahead incredibly fast, and I really wouldn't want us to see us getting fixed into one particular form of delivering that. So I think we should add be as energy efficient and flexible as possible. Point 3 from scrutiny, yes.
This is number 3 or number 4?
Number 3.
Number 3. Designed to achieve carbon neutrality. Yeah. Efficient. Yeah.
It's
efficient
energy efficient and flexible.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Byrne. Terry.
Thank you. Really building on Councillor Bayliss' point of the fact that if we were to attract a private company, we could maybe provide them with a guaranteed customer base in terms of subsidising certain memberships for certain parts of the community. But Rother's not the only game in town there. It's health and well-being. And I know in some authorities that the health service actually subsidise membership, certainly of pools. So it would be very remiss of us not to look at any cross-funding opportunities there might be between the health service and any provision we might make, or we might encourage a private provider to make within Rother.
Thanks for that, Terry. I'll just bring in Councillor John Barnes and then Councillor Jeanette Stevens, and then there's Councillor Cortell here before I invite you to wrap up. Okay.
Yes, I just wanted, Terry Byrne has actually begun the point that I was particularly interested in, which is I hope we bring the health service very fully into consultation. This is one of those areas where, in fact, one body invests and another body saves, and that's always extremely difficult. The major savings here will be to the health service. And that's why the primary care sector really should be taking enormous interest in promoting activity. Some of the activities that are best are mentioned, but not mentioned in the report of leisure. When I was chairman of the PCT, we identified ballroom dancing as particularly important for elderly people, not because so much of the physical activity, but because it improved their balance. And one of the major casualties that takes people into hospital are falls. And anything that can stop falls saves an enormous amount of money to the public purse. The problem is, of course, the health service needs then to join in joint ventures, I think, with local authorities to promote this kind of activity. We've enormous resource in our footpaths, and I think one of the things that Burwash has done very successfully is to promote maps of routes, and they've actually measured the number of steps on those routes and encouraging people to walk. Another is to encourage people to walk with a purpose. On swimming, I was brought up in a town that actually had a saltwater lido as well as a swimming pool, and the saltwater lido was actually extremely well used and a good place to learn to swim. What we've done in Etchingham is create a physical gym, but we've found enormous pleasure in the joint facility we have with the school in encouraging walking football and walking cricket, both of which bring the older people back into team sports. They can no longer play team sports of a more athletic kind, but believe you me, they are still playing team sports, but at a much slower pace. And it is very important we actually do bring the education sector on board, because most of these problems of inactivity start very early, and actually team sports are a good way of getting people in. They tend to take their fashion from national success. And one of the reasons why swimming pools have tended to be undervalued is because we have not been that successful. We have in recent years been a lot more successful, hence you'll see a lot more desire for them. But I think we do need to actually realise that football grounds are still going to be extraordinarily important after the women's success at international level. I've said enough, Chairman, but I wish this extraordinarily well. I think it is crucial for the future health of our nation.
Thank you, John. Jeanette.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to say that it's a really good report to Rachel and Deborah. I can't say I'm not disappointed about the Rye swimming pool, considering that it did have school children being taught there, lane swimming and disabled. And I'm just a little bit upset that Rother couldn't have gave some sort of grant that could have been paid back.
Jeanette, we're not discussing Rye swimming pool this evening.
No,
it's a strategy that's going into consultation.
It's part of this report.
And you and scrutiny are looking at this again, I think.
I just wanted to make my feelings. I'm disappointed about it, that's all. That it's closed today, and this report is asking that we're short of them, and that's all I really wanted to get across. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. Several people have mentioned roughly the same subject. Rachel Fowler mentioned residents economically or financially disadvantaged needs to be considered. Councillor Bayliss mentioned subsidised residents on low incomes. Councillor Proshak mentioned the anti-poverty strategy. Councillor Byrne mentioned subsidising certain parts of the community. These are all leading to the same theme. At the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and it's in the minutes, that this theme was also mentioned, but unfortunately it's not one of the recommendations. I was one of a couple of councillors at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee who covered this theme, and I would like to request that this theme be added as a resolution of Cabinet as a fifth point in addition to the four that are currently in the recommendations.
I'm sure that'll come out in the consultation, but I'll hand over to Councillor Timpey's report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Well, everybody's said pretty much everything, which is great. I'm glad it's got support because it's a significant amount of work and research that was done for this particular strategy. And thank you, Rachel, and your team, and for Deborah, and all your patience with Councillor Vinehorn and myself with our little questions, etc. But I think the key point here is that this is for 10 years and beyond. This is not... I understand what you're saying, Councillor Dixon, about people's expectations, but that particular point has to be stressed because tomorrow there isn't going to be this pool, next month there isn't going to be, or whatever. So the consultation needs to be very clear, and I'm not sure with our questions that are going out, we might need to review those. Because expectations sometimes get raised, don't they, and then people get disappointed. But the key is working in partnership with people because we can't afford to build an all-singing, all-dancing leisure facility. And meetings with Freedom Leisure show that people just are not returning in their droves to leisure in the current form, and hence their particular problems as well as energy. But we're not in competition. We cannot be in competition with the myriad of opportunities that are out there in our district. And there's a list a mile long that Active Rother are signposting people to what's available. So it's quite key that we get a little bit more imaginative about this particular project, in that commercially it could work if we get we start thinking a bit more laterally about what other things will support it. For example, I don't know if any of you have noticed that Debenhams building in Hastings that's an empty building that a commercial operator has taken over and turned into an indoor adventure park. But the things that he's bringing in there are for children, but they're also for adults. And those commercial, I can just see a pool with those commercial things dotted around it. And this particular thing has got a cafe and an outdoor leisure place, etc. So I just think that exploring our partnerships commercially, as well as perhaps with other authorities, but it's the commercial side, because it's working in partnership versus capital investment. Because as Councillor Dixon quite rightly says, we do not have the money. I mean, it's great that there might be some money coming from government, and hence the place, etc. And if there was, I would be absolutely thrilled. But until we see it, we know the criteria, we're at a point where perhaps we could change some things if their criteria doesn't quite fit our strategy, because it's key that we get some money from government to support the health of everybody in our district. So I do have one point, though, regarding the overview and scrutiny recommendations. I don't support number 2, where we're being asked to reword the strategy to include the word deliverer, because that goes back to Councillor Dixon's point. That raises huge expectations of what we can or can't do. So I would rather just see it left as it was, that we are an enabler and signposter. So I am proposing to put forward this particular strategy for approval, but not number 2. Thank you.
I mean, the problem with that is the...
Hold on, John. Sorry, we're just about to discuss the amendment, which...
yeah.
It's the amendment I'm speaking to, Chairman.
Well, we haven't actually said what the amendment is yet, John.
Well, I heard what was proposed.
John, can we just hold it there, John, please, until we get...
All right, I want to draw attention to an awkward fact.
Okay, right. We're at the point of... you're going to propose an amendment to number 2.
We just take it out.
Take it.
Thank you.
Also, are we including unflexible?
Unflexible.
In 3. Yeah.
I think also it says principle 2, and I think Deborah might just check this. I think it's actually principle 1, isn't it? I think there's been a typo there. Just check that, just to be sure. I might be wrong, but I think I'm right. I think it is meant to be 1.
Chair, can I just clarify that I must admit I'm slightly confused here. Is it just a case of taking out the words, it's one of deliverer as well as enabler, to be the council's role is one of enabler and signposter?
Yeah.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Is one of enabler and signposter.
Energy efficient and flexible as possible. Right. Okay. So that's been.
I'm happy to second that.
You're happy to second that. Okay. John, would you like to make? You want to make a comment?
I just draw your attention to the very last slide, which exemplifies the report, which says specifically, and in some cases, the deliverer. When we discuss this overview and scrutiny, and I'm quite prepared to see the wording altered, but to rule out delivery altogether seems to me actually to go against what is recommended in the report.
Okay, well, maybe a change of word on that, Catherine?
I think the key word which Councillor Barnes used was recommended in the report. We've heard the presentation, we've read the report, and what we are agreeing tonight is what we would like to go out to consultation. This isn't the final document. It might change when it becomes a final strategy.
Yep, that makes sense. Anybody else want to make a comment on that before Councillor Cortell?
Sorry, this is a slight deviation. It's simply that I hadn't actually finished speaking when you moved on to Councillor Timpey. I noticed one point in the report, which was that no new ideas which are not already in the report will be considered. And that alarms me, because we're completely ruling out ideas from the public as opposed to detailed amendments.
You're reading this note at the bottom of page 17, are you?
I can't remember where.
The new proposals can be added to the draft strategy once it's gone to public consultation?
Yeah. Yes, that is exactly it. That tells me that we're closing our minds to any substantial improvements.
Sorry, Chair. If you read the second sentence, we would be considering the public responses.
Amend responses, but we can amend things, but we can't take on a completely new concept, a completely new idea, according to that note.
Ben, could you just clarify that, please?
Yeah. So thank you, Chairman. So for the purpose of Councillor Cortell, it's the members have made a decision on the strategy that they want to put out to the public. What we can't then do is then change that strategy without reason, so i.e. the public consultation comes back and says we love the strategy, we can't then change it without going back out to consultation. However, if the public come in with some ideas and say, look, we think this is great, and that gets overwhelming support, then absolutely it's within the members' remit to change it based on the public consultation. That's the whole purpose of the public consultation. What we're saying now is this is our strategy moving forward, and we're not going to deviate significantly from that unless the public has spoken in one way or the other.
Okay, Jonathan?
And I should add that this report has been based on a considerable amount of consultation and research done by Rachel and her group, and a very significant piece of research that went out across the district, which was well represented. I mean, you can never get it exactly as you like, but it was as well represented as we were likely to get. So there has been a lot of input already from the public. I mean, it has actually come out of research as opposed to coming up with ideas and seeing if they're any good afterwards. It started from the bottom up.
Agreed. Paul, did you want to make a comment before we?
Yeah, if I may, Chairman. Seems ironic we probably spoke about it longer here than we did at scrutiny, but there you go. Yeah, I'm concerned at taking out the. Where is it now? I've lost it. The word deliverer. Yeah, I'm concerned at the proposal to take out the word deliverer because it was supported across the whole committee. Members from all sides of the chamber, we all came together and came up with that. So that is a concern. I think you sort of almost, if you hung up, you're just sort of looking at, are we the deliverer of a multi-million pound swimming pool with this, that, and everything else in it? When you could argue, well, we could deliver outdoor gym equipment or something simple, or and I can see where you're trying to sort of draw a line that the council is not you know, or we can't afford to provide multi-million-pound facilities, but equally we can assist and provide less expensive things or something that's pretty simple. So I would be concerned at taking out the word deliverer. I think it's, you know, a deliverer as well as enabler and signposter. You know, a signposter sounds, you know, an enabler, it just sounds like someone who's just going to give plan permission and say, oh, ring Bill in British Cycling if you want to ride a bike. You know?
Hazel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If overruled scrutiny, I mean, I do recall the conversations. I mean, we could leave the word deliverer, but it's got to be qualified because it goes back to expectations. You know, there is not going to be a new leisure centre. Unless it's supported by the commercial sector.
This could read, the council's role is primarily one of enabler and signposter, and secondarily as a deliverer of opportunities to be physically active.
Could I add the word possible deliverer?
Where possible.
Because where appropriate, yeah. But that's fine.
Yes, I think the point here, and you know, it's important to get the wording right, and to address Councillor Osborne. If you go through and read later in the strategy, it actually talks about supporting towns and parish councils, you know, which is the way to support those sort of things that you were describing. So it's a different form of delivery, but it absolutely we absolutely have to send the message and make it very clear what our primary role is going to be, and we can already see the facilities out there, but we haven't been very good at directing people to those facilities as part of what we might do, and the world has changed, so that needs to happen. But we also see some very good models out there. I commented on Battle earlier, and I think, you know, lots of parishes are doing different things. I think John Barnes mentioned Burwash and their footpaths. So there's all sorts of things, creative things that can be done to get people more active and across a much broader range, and particularly the older age groups. And I think we've heard that, again, dancing in halls. And one thing village halls do very well is promote many, many different activities. The amount of different sport-type activities that occur in village and town halls is quite amazing, really. So I think we can give comfort. You need to read further down into the strategy to get to that detail. I think that's the point. Yeah.
Okay, so the proposal as this becomes two. The council role is primarily one of enabler and signposter and possible deliverer for opportunities to be physically active. Got someone to... Yes? Okay. Okay, we can go to the vote on that. All those in favour? That's unanimous. And thank you very much indeed for all the work that's gone into this. With Rachel, Deborah and the supporting officers, which I know others have been involved. So I think we've got something that we can go forward with for consultation. I think that was the whole purpose of it tonight. There's been a lot of discussion, which I think other people wanting to get their ability to make comments, but I think the consultation would be another opportunity. And as Jonathan mentioned, you know, the work that you did with the community groups in getting the consultation to get with the research, I think has brought it a long way forward. So thank you very much indeed. Okay, agenda item 8, the East Sussex Temporary Accommodation Policy, a report of Joe Pell, Head of Housing and Community. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. A brief report, just trying to highlight the, as a policy, it's gone through the Overview and Scrutiny Committee before coming here. It's a East Sussex-wide policy that's being adopted by the 5 districts and boroughs, really in order to try and provide a greater sense of consistency for people who use temporary accommodation in the wider county. and to ensure that the many different private providers that we use are also having their expectations managed about what we expect of them as well. The East Sussex policy was written by the operational housing managers, so our Caroline Wakefield here at Rother, across those districts and boroughs. And it's relatively limited in scope due to the attempts to align the processes across those 5 areas, focusing really on the standards and size and location of temporary accommodation that people can expect, and some of the processes and procedures will follow when placing people in temporary accommodation. Examples include we agree what as I say, what is suitable in terms of the size and location of the temporary accommodation, to provide the amount of money households that are working contribute to their cost of their placement, which has been inconsistent in the past, and also a few more minor things around the status of pets, etc. So happy to take questions on the report, but I hope the report itself is fairly self-explanatory. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Joe, and it's nice to know that we were very much involved in the creation of this policy, I believe. Any questions for Joe?
Just a quick question, because in Robertsbridge I'm labelled as the hub for the Ukrainians. Some are going back, actually going back to Moldova, not to Ukraine, but the 6 months is coming to an end. And the government seem to have forgotten that, and we don't know what. I mean, there's huge anxiety out there, and we don't know what's going to happen. If they've got nowhere to go, they're going to come to us. And I just wondered if we were ready, or if we had any indication of what's going to happen.
Joe?
Yeah, there's a great deal of work going on to support the Ukraine crisis, and we've got a collaborative approach across East Sussex, again with the housing departments, but health, social care, education as well. It's a challenge. We've foreseen this happening for some time. The government is putting out messaging. We've done our own survey commissioned by we've commissioned Voluntary Action to do our own survey of residents who are accommodating Ukrainian refugees in the country, to understand their intentions and direct our colleague Dot, who many of you may know from the Syrian and Afghan schemes, who's now committed to this scheme 100% of her time, to support and facilitate the sustainment of those placements. But where those fail, looking primarily at rematching, but also we've commissioned with the county support service to try and educate and understand what it is what it is different Ukrainian households wish to do. Do they wish to remain here for a longer term, short term, or do they want to go back? And trying to facilitate and arm people with information and knowledge really about how to locate themselves where they for them and their families, where they've got the best for their future. So it's challenging. We have about 4 Ukrainian households accommodated in temporary accommodation at the moment. That's subsidised by the Homes for Ukraine scheme, so we're not paying for that out of our base budget. That's funded. For how long it remains unclear, although it's a fairly well-funded scheme at the moment, given the international attention on. And there's a sort of a standard that is trying to be achieved across Western Europe, I suppose. So yeah, we are across the risk. There is a risk that as the 6 months turns to 12 months, that we get more and more. But we do have provision as well, just to reassure you, in terms of contingency with some of our holiday parks as well at the moment. So.
Thank you. Councillor Maynard, did you want to make a comment?
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And also I'd like to declare obviously an interest as lead member for adult social care and health on East Sussex County Council. And it's only to say, to give some really clear reassurance, I hope, that anybody who watches the recordings of my lead member meetings, or indeed reads the minutes of those meetings, will see that I think that's the 5th lead member meeting in a row that I chaired today, where we were appropriating additional funding to make sure that we support Ukrainian refugees. And specifically today, I can give you the information that an additional 495,000 has been allocated to support host families in terms of additional payments, because quite clearly some of those host families, just like many other families across the county, will be possibly having financial hardship as the cost of living crisis steepens through the winter. So we are proposing additional payments to host families for the next 6 months. And that's one of the key things we're doing. But it's also, I think, fair. I'd like to take this opportunity just to say that around providing employment opportunities for Ukrainian refugees, we're also on the front foot in that area as well. Clearly, the housing and that problem possibly of Ukrainian refugees coming to the end of their time with host families, that's something that clearly we want to address by hopefully encouraging host families to continue hosting Ukrainian refugees. But just to say, it's a multi-agency approach, and we are absolutely committed from the County Council's perspective to make sure that we work with districts and boroughs to make sure that those Ukrainian refugees are looked after well, and are given appropriate job opportunities as they go forward. And that references back to the comments that Joe made earlier about this becoming a little bit more long term. Clearly, the situation back in Ukraine is extremely volatile, and I think it's fair to say that one could imagine very few of those refugees would want to take the trip home right now, because the situation seems to be deepening rather than improving. But to give Councillor Prochak and other councillors in the chamber and watching this webcast the reassurance that County Council are doing as much as they possibly can, but also to say that it would be really useful if you do take the time to look at what we are doing to make sure that if residents ask you the questions, the answers are there. I'm certainly happy to make sure that in terms of our press releases that councillors get those as well. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. It's very useful information. I'm sure Joe and his team will be dealing with that. Joe, yes?
It'd be remiss of me not to highlight at this point on a public broadcast that we are still in need of hosts. So if people do want to put themselves forward to host Ukrainian families, we can still do contact me, and the website gives you instruction how to do so.
Okay, a couple of questions here or comments. Jonathan, Catherine?
Yeah, you go first. Yeah, I'd like to go first because in the light of Councillor Maynard's comments, I need to declare a personal interest as a member of East Sussex County Council.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I just sort of wanted to explore a little bit more with Joe. I mean, as you probably know, we have been hosts, and interestingly, our family has gone back, but we're keeping our accommodation open because they might return, and we said we would do that. But I'm pretty connected in with quite a few, and also what's been reported on the Apora Facebook page, which is one of the main charities that are managing Ukrainians, and there is a lot of angst and discussion with the knowledge that we can't house the people on our own housing list effectively, and those with families, and most are mothers with children, rather than fathers or males, are settled, and their children are going to the local schools, and it takes a little bit of time for them to assimilate into the school, and once they're there, they're settled. And I know one of the colleagues on the parish council has hosted some, and they're having to move from that. And the offer is to go to Eastbourne. It's the same problem that we know the temporary accommodation problem, and of course the children are settled in a school nearby. So it seems to be an impossible problem. Will those that can't continue in their accommodation go into temporary accommodation, or is there what sort of plans are you working on? I mean, I know it's a very difficult problem. You're being handed probably one of the most unsolvable problems you could get. I'm just wondering where your thought process is on that.
We have, thank you, Chair. We have an approved resettlement approach funded through the County Council through the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which is a package which includes, as Councillor Maynard has highlighted, some employment, access to employment. Really, employment is the key for people to find the ability to afford private rented accommodation. We have and will continue to support people into private rented accommodation. We are providing people with the same standard of service and same, or rather, tenant finder scheme is an effective tool for finding people accommodation. And we find many landlords have an ear for this client group because of the publicity around the war in the Ukraine. So that's helpful. But really, they're in the same situation that any other homeless household is, albeit with enhanced supports, which quite rightly they have because they don't have their own networks around them. We are mindful of our, unfortunately, the degree of people and the number of people we have who are homeless, who are, been in this country longer, but we don't end up we've got to get the balance right, really, between the support we provide. So there are no easy answers. I'll reiterate, the process is we try and rematch, find new hosts, and or try and facilitate, mediate between hosts and guests, and provide, again, households with the information they need to make an informed choice about where if they wish to resettle more permanently in this country. The simple fact is that we have a minimum wage in this country, and most of the work that these people will be entering into will be in the lower end of the economy, and it's not rocket science to understand where the house prices are very varied across the country, whereas the wages are not. So it's about making informed decisions. We welcome people to remain in this area, absolutely. It is very challenging, though, as you highlight, particularly in rural areas, to afford accommodation. But I'm in danger of describing the problem. The solutions are the solutions are the same as what we have for our existing population, really, albeit enhanced because of their circumstances.
Thank you, Joe. Councillor Cortell? Oh, sorry, Catherine.
Thank you. I was prompted to speak by something Joe has just said, which is most of the Ukrainian refugees will be entering into the lower end of the economy. Is that because those with very high skills, as many of them I would have thought haven't got the appropriate language skills? And if that is the case, shouldn't we be trying to help them with the county council, but certainly with a scheme to make sure that they can enter at an appropriate level into the economy and thus alleviate our problems?
We are doing so, yeah, in terms of ESOL provision, English as a second language provision. Yeah, so that's part of the package.
This report is about temporary accommodation policy. We're going into other things. So, Christine, do you want to have a quick point?
Yes, a quick point. Joe will know that I've been dealing with a homeless family where the child is got serious special educational needs and has been moved over to Eastbourne. But I mean, I understand that the child is being transported back to their placement for their special education. But it seems to me that where you've got under paragraph 6, you've got a lot of criteria, but I just wondered if there are rankings. So, for example, where you have very vulnerable families, where you have children involved, that sort of trumps other criteria. I mean, I understand. I don't want to be critical because I know that the team have done all they can at the moment, but it just highlights to me that maybe education and vulnerability needs to come up the top.
Joe, do you want a quick answer to that, or was it something you take on outside?
Yeah, and it's articulated in the policy as such. If you read the appendix, I mean, I'm not expecting you. No, it's a long report, but it's in there. Yeah, there is a hierarchy, and we do try to prioritise those with the sorts of needs you've just described. There are others as well, but those mainly it's education and work, employment.
Okay, perhaps Councillor Terry Byrne would just like to make a comment on this before we move it.
Thank you, Doug. The debate in the chamber so far has really widened out the whole issue of accommodation and temporary accommodation. But going back to temporary accommodation, it highlights the need for having a consistent approach across the county and consistent criteria for assessing people who are homeless, as against why they're homeless, what the circumstances are. And that's what this report is about. It doesn't it doesn't seek to solve the housing shortage problem or all the various problems we have in temporary accommodation, but it does provide a consistent approach. What I would say is, for anyone who's read the detail, it is a lot of detail. And I think we should all be very aware, A, that Joe and the other people across the county have really drilled down into almost every aspect of temporary accommodation when they're considering the various criteria. But equally, remember, Rother's staff are being phoned up and asked, what do I do about this? What do I do about that? Our staff have to assimilate an incredible amount of information. And I don't think we should ever forget that. It's very difficult sometimes, I'm sure, working in housing, knowing that when you go to work, you're going to, in general, be telling people, we'd like to meet your expectations, but I'm sorry, we can't. And it never ceases to amaze me how our staff remain motivated to do that. And they do their very best. And having a cross-county strategy like this on a temporary accommodation is always a very emotive subject. So I think it's very timely that we get this across the county. Everyone's bought into it, and I'm sure our officers will administer it. And I think members will find that they're not getting the complaints like, oh, well, my friend in Wealdon said they did this, and my friend in Rother said they did, in Hastings they do that. We've got rid of that, and I think this is an absolutely excellent strategy. So I would commend it, and I move its adoption.
Second for that. Thank you very much. I did invite you, Paul. Is there any comment to make? I know it came through scrutiny, but I think it's as per read.
We basically thought it was a very good idea.
Thank you very much indeed. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Agenda item 9. Okay, right. Joe, again, this is the Rother District Council owned leased accommodation complaints handling policy. This again came through scrutiny earlier this month. Joe, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a statutory requirement as for the council to have this, a new statutory requirement to have this in place, this complaints policy. We became a registered provider in 2020 and have 24 units of accommodation now under our own ownership, and we have at least one leased unit and the burgeoning and new leasing scheme. The policy is required as part of the social housing reform post the Grenfell tragedy, as people will be familiar with that event, and there's been a tightening up of processes around safety primarily, but also about tenant consultation and ensuring that we identify issues early and that we seek to rectify them early. So I hope that the report and the policy itself are fairly self-explanatory. It will be coming annual report will be going to Audit and Standards annually to inform that committee of our performance against the policy. So members will have the opportunity to monitor our performance as a landlord. We'll also publish publicly the outcome of our assessment and assessment of tenants' needs. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks for the clarity on that, Joe. Are there any questions? Perhaps Councillor Project, Sue?
It's a quick one. I asked Councillor Byrne beforehand. The complaints are going to be reported once a year to audit. That's right, isn't it? Is that appropriate? I mean, I'm assuming you're dealing with them before they get to December.
Receive an awful lot of complaints. We do a survey annually, and it's been positive. We did a first one; it's been pretty positive. We only have a few tenants, so it's very small, but it's been fairly positive. We are proposing to do so annually. I mean, Mark Adams does his report, which goes to Audit and Standards, I think, quarter, maybe annually. Is it 6 monthly?
6 months.
Yeah. But it's a statutory requirement to do annually. I mean, if members wish for it to be more frequent, I'm sure it's something we can look at.
No other question. Terry, would you like just to make a comment on this?
Thanks, Doug. Again, very timely. 2 years ago, this wouldn't have been relevant. we didn't own anything. We weren't providing things in Rother. And now we've got a very successful property acquisition team, and we've also got a very successful offering to private landlords to take on their property, to lease properties from them. So the mere fact that we need this strategy is really good news. And I think it's a well worked out strategy. As Joe said, most of it is statutory. It's the duty we have. I think that the document explains what we do, how we do it, why we do it. And yeah, I'm just very glad that it's coming in front of Cabinet at the moment, as I say, because I think it proves again we've done some really, really great work in making Rother a far more reasonable place to try and rent accommodation. Up and down the country, there's problems all over the place. We're doing the best we can, and I think we're ahead of the game. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Paul, would you just like to make the comment again that it's a good report, or?
Yeah, basically we thought this was a very good idea and a good report, as usual, from Joe.
Excellent. Okay, you're going to move the report, Terry? I'll move the report. And second, Catherine, thank you very much. And those in favour, unanimous. Excellent. Thank you, Joe. And officers that are supporting you on both these items that we've just looked at. Item 10, Economic Recovery Plan Update. I'm not sure who's presenting this. Ben is. Thank you, Ben. To update members on progress against the Council's COVID recovery plan and plan next steps.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's now been 2.5 years since the first lockdown was initiated, and shortly after the first lockdown was initiated, we started work on our COVID recovery plan. That was approved by Cabinet Council back in 2020. This report effectively seeks to draw a line under that work as we look now forward into the future about what sort of place we want to shape as Rother District. And so what we've sought to do with this report is really champion the achievements that were achieved under the COVID recovery plan and the actions that were taken. And what we've sought to do within the report is give you a bit of a background. Paragraphs 9 through to 17 give you a bit of an understanding of some of the key aspects of support that were provided throughout that period. And Appendix 1 is a detailed breakdown on all of the activity that was undertaken as part of the COVID recovery plan. I don't want to go into through the presentation in too much detail. It's all there in the report, and I'm happy to take any questions about it. I think the key bit to note is that a lot of work went into supporting businesses and the economy throughout the pandemic period, throughout this council, and I know Councillor Bayliss wants to talk through some bits of that tonight. What we'd like to do, what we'd like from this report really is the in principle approval from Cabinet to draw a line under the COVID recovery aspect of the work that we're looking to do and start drawing up a new forward-looking economic development and regeneration strategy for Rother District that's going to take us over the next 10 to 15 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Questions, Catherine?
Yes, thank you very much. Really interesting report, and I'm glad to see that, I knew that the COVID recovery work had gone really well, and we've done an awful lot to help businesses in the district. I am particularly excited to see, because I like to eat, the Rye Fisheries Initiative out of their kitchen. I think that is such an imaginative way to solve the issue of what you do with your fish when you can't sell it over the channel anymore. Furthermore, it cuts down food miles and it cuts down emissions, which is why I was quite surprised to see in the environmental box. It was said there's no environmental impact in this report, and quite clearly that is. And I shall carry on saying this until one day somebody gets it right. So yes, excellent report, very keen on the fisheries. But now we've got the business saved from COVID and we're moving forward, and Councillor Bayliss raised with me as the lead member for environmental management, and we have talked about this. Wouldn't it be great in this council to have a green business scheme? Yes. Whether it's an award system or an online digital book like we have with considerate contractors, but something to recognise everything local business is doing towards sustainability and reducing our emissions, and in this case they'd be our Scope 3 emissions, but also to encourage them to get on with it and do it, and to tell the district that actually we're about more than just electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging points, that our ambitions for carbon reduction goes throughout the entire district, and we should be commending businesses who do this. And I think we need a scheme to encourage them to do it. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Councillor Suproj.
Really, really support what you're saying, Councillor Field. I'm glad to hear that we're going to have some rural grant money, because we've got higher allocation in the rural areas for business, for workspace, the employment space, than we do in Bexhill, which is extraordinary. So if you look on, it's page 63, which is about expanding low-carbon transport and energy infrastructure. I think we really need to focus on helping our businesses now with energy costs. I mean, expressions like eye-watering have been used, and businesses are facing eye-watering costs, and we know already of some that are closing because of their energy costs. And I do think now that the public are really more amenable to having the green infrastructure in place now than they used to be. At one time, you used to have solar panel grants, and farmers came with arrays in fields. We don't get that anymore because I think it stopped the government subsidy for that. But if we can focus on that now, because all the wonderful work that was done, on recovering from COVID, but it's now being unpicked somewhat with these energy costs.
Any other questions? Paul? Oh, sorry, Councillor Dixon. Yeah, I've forgotten.
Chairman.
I'll come back to you, John.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm going to beat Councillor Bayliss in mentioning all the grants that we've given away. And again, for the last time, congratulate Chris Watchman and his team for the amount of money that they got out of the door of this building, £48.5 million to business, which is an astonishing amount of money to be distributed amongst a relatively small district. And what I'm asking for, Chairman, in this very positive report, and it is a positive report, and it is a good record of what this council did and what its officers did during that time, and I think it's very important that is recorded. Maybe with the minutes, could we possibly ask Tony Baden to add in the figure of how much the COVID actually cost the council in cash? I know it's a round figure somewhere in the region of £500,000, but I do think that needs to be recorded as well, that we spent that amount of our reserves ourselves on the COVID situation and the consequent recovery. And I think that within this report, it would be good to have that mentioned as well, of what we did financially, as well as the amount of time that you possibly can't quantify that our officers put in, particularly in the Revs and Bens department, in getting this money out. And this isn't of course, these COVID grants aren't the end of it, are they? Because our teams have been asked to then distribute energy grants to our residents as well. And this, whenever government announces a great scheme that it's going to give money to people, it's great. But unfortunately, the burden does land on us to be able to deliver that. And it is testament to our team that we managed that time and time and time again.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, and I think we'd all echo that. Tony, would you like to make an observation?
Well, I'll just comment that the figure that that Councillor Dixon was referring to was we reported it in the outturn at about £485,000, I think it was. I should just point out though that we were also, I was very clear in that report, it was never a precise science. It was an estimate of where we felt we were short or hadn't been covered by a central government grant, but that was our best estimate.
Well, I think it's an excellent report, and I'm sure Christine would like to add some comments to this. Yeah, by all means. I haven't forgotten you, John.
Just in support of what Councillor Pritchard in Field has said about the decarbonisation, I wonder if the rural support grant, Rural England Prosperity Fund, which Ben has just told me we're receiving about 700,000 for, could be focused on decarbonisation grants, because I think it's capital grants, isn't it? I think capital grants.
They are, sorry, Chairman. They are, yes. I mean, there are some expectations that come with them around job creation and economic, obviously, development, because that's where they're focused at. But there's what we've done with all of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund funding is we've taken it through a stakeholder panel, which includes 3 district council members, the 2 MPs, and a range of external stakeholders to sort of get the steer on where that was going. So the assumption was that we would probably take it, because it's part of the UK Shared Prosperity, would take that back through them, but we could make that one of the recommendations to them as well.
So, for example, if you have a capital cost which releases revenue for a business, and that revenue can generate another job, would that be the sort of thing that might be eligible?
At the moment, it's a bit hard to tell, because we received notification that we were getting the grant, and then we had about 2 weeks to turn it round. So literally our prospectus back to government at the moment is we're going to run a grant scheme. The details of that grant scheme are yet to be fully worked out.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor John Barnes.
Chairman, I realise this report is mainly about what we've done over the COVID crisis, and I do echo the congratulations to our staff in the way they actually distributed the government's money very effectively indeed. I think they do deserve our thanks. But there are 2 paragraphs about new funding, and I was particularly struck by paragraph 19. It's very welcome indeed, I think, that Sidley will benefit if we do get the Levelling Up Fund grant with a new centre. But I wonder whether the details of where the rest of the money goes could be communicated to us as councillors. In particular, I'm interested in what we're doing to enhance the skills in the area, and I welcome more detail on that.
Ben, would you just like to make a comment on that? Maybe something that will come forward a bit later on once we're nearer to whether we're going to receive any funding.
Absolutely, Chairman. I think if we're successful in achieving the fund, I'm happy to catch up with Councillor Barnes outside the meeting, give him an understanding of the bid. But if we are successful in getting the Levelling Up Fund, then we'll be bringing back to Cabinet and full Council a full and detailed appraisal of what exactly the outputs and outcomes are, particularly around the skills, which is quite a heavy focus on the bid.
Councillor Cortell, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, please. First of all, I think it's a very thorough report. I'm most impressed by it. I have 3 detailed points I'd like to make. On page 62, Bexhill Town Centre Strategy Development. It talks about reopening High Street safely, and we employed 2 communication officers to achieve that. I don't think we have a communication officer for Rother, and if we could have 2 communication officers for the Bexhill Town Centre Strategy Development, albeit temporarily, maybe we might like to reconsider the outsourcing of communications.
Well, we do have a communications officer, Paul, and perhaps Christine, would you like to cover off that?
I can just answer that point in particular. So the 2 communication officers were actually employed under Una Kane and the environmental health team, and they went and advised not only businesses in Bexhill Town Centre, but Rye and Battle and all around the district on how you would reopen your shop or your retail unit, what safe distancing systems you needed to put in place. They were there to advise people on it, especially after that first lockdown period, and we had the first lot of welcome back. So they weren't communication officers in the sense I think that you're thinking, Councillor Courtell. They were actually environmental health officers who were giving advice to businesses about opening safely.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much, Councillor Bayliss. My next 2 points.
Brief points, Paul.
Yes. On page 65, it mentions that we support the 5G rollout across the district. There is a controversial issue in my own ward at the moment on this, and certainly some residents have health concerns about 5G, and I wonder whether we should be so positive in building this into our strategy. The last point I'd like to make is that I was talking to a Hastings councillor recently who told me that they have a grants officer who has managed to get a grant for over £60 million for one project, which is very, very good, a very good return on the investment of one's salary. And I wondered whether, while there are so many grants out there that we need to apply for, or attempting to apply for, whether that might be something that this council might consider.
Right, thank you for that. Ben, you look a bit perplexed. Are you going to maybe respond on that?
I'm not going to comment on the 5G thing. I don't think I have the expertise to do so. I would say, in terms of the grant officer, we've been exceptionally successful at drawing in grant, no less than £8.7 million for Blackfriars. Joe's area alone has levied in significant capital and revenue grants to help sustain the housing service. Brownfield Land Release Fund for housing development through the acquisitions team. So I'd say I think there's little, in an organisation of our size, there's little value in having a dedicated grants officer when actually the people who are best placed to write the bids for those grants and best placed to understand what the requirements are and our deliverability of them are those who are within the service areas, and we are well placed to do those, and we do significantly well from them. I'm not quite sure what £60 million grant that Hastings have received recently. I know they got the £20 million Towns deal, but I think that's the biggest that they've received in the last sort of 10 years or so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Ben. Tony, were you making a nod or something there to make a comment? I wasn't sure.
I was nodding in agreement with Ben. The other point, I guess I'll make a point whilst I've got the microphone, Chair, for me, that there is lots of available grant pots swimming around that local, central government have made available, which you do need the resources. Once you secure the grant, you do need the resources to spend that money. So it's not quite as easy as bidding for £60 million and getting it, and away you go. It's much more complex than that. But I totally agree with everything that Ben said. I think as an officer group, we capture the availability of whatever grants are out there anyway, and I think we do that quite successfully. Thank you.
Christine, your report.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to thank Melanie Powell and Ben Hook for a really comprehensive run through all the work that was undertaken. And I would like to re-emphasise the thanks to Chris Watchman and his team, who went over and above, I think, sometimes, because I was corresponding with him over the weekend sometimes about grants that have been paid and questions that I was getting from businesses that he was dealing with. So officers were absolutely outstanding in all of this. Yes, Councillor Dixon raises about this is £48 million that came through our coffers and out the door, but there are sort of slodges of money here that we received that no other authority in East Sussex received. This is where we were so successful in getting our grants out that actually we got additional money. I think nationwide there were 30 authorities that got additional money, and we were one of those. And that enabled us to set up a very specific grant scheme, which is sort of set out in the back of the report. So a lot of the money was paid out to businesses according to rateable value, but then there was also a lot of money that went out on very targeted grant schemes. And there was a certain amount of flack that was, or back chat that I was picking up at the beginning, that we were actually diverging from East Sussex norms in terms of how they were dishing up additional grant schemes. But because we'd sat and listened, and Tony Leonard, the previous officer in charge of this area, and I sat and had meetings with local businesses, we're able to really make sure that it met local needs. And as I say, that was, I think, really, really important in terms of the additional grants. And Councillor Dixon and I spent a lot of time with Chris Watchman designing those additional grant schemes. So listening, I think, worked, and we certainly sort of have looked at what we could have done better. I think one of the areas we could have done better at was in terms of communications out, and as a result of our lessons learned, a small lessons learned exercise that Melanie and I ran, we've actually set up rather business alerts now, which would help us tremendously if we were in the same sort of situation with regards to communicating with business and getting them to talk back to us. I think Councillor Prochat raises a really good point. I mean, if I look at the work that we were doing at the beginning of the year in terms of training grants that we were giving out, a lot of those, that money, we were thinking through how businesses need to rebuild themselves. So I've been working on a scheme called Cooking Up Community Skills, which is part of that particular piece of work, is about helping businesses recruit and people into the catering industry, and that's ongoing. But it's all been overtaken by the energy crisis. And I think we've heard a bit about the energy crisis and how it's impacting in Rother already. But businesses are really, really struggling. And we are, working with the local MP, highlighting that the government support is really just not touching the sides in terms of the money that's coming into business. Just for an example, a business in the town centre, retail shop, 17.5p a unit for electricity at the beginning of the year. It's now 117p a unit for electricity. It's gone up phenomenally. Now, the government support is only giving 34p back in relation to that, which still means that business is having to cope with a 3, 4, 5 times increase in the cost of their electricity. And we're working to make sure that the MPs know that, and if there are additional support for local businesses in relation to electricity costs or fuel costs, that is what we now need, because I fear that we may lose businesses over the winter months. So, well done to the officers, well done to everybody. And, we've now got more businesses open in Bexhill Town Centre than we had. We've got less empty shops in Bexhill Town Centre than we had before the pandemic struck. And that, I think, is a really good outcome, and shows how we've worked with our commercial sector to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's a very encouraging report. It's a report to be noted, and work to commence on the new regeneration strategy for the council. I just hope that in not 12 months' time we're not having a report regarding the recovery of the cost of living crisis, because that's looming out there, and I think that's almost as severe as what we've seen before. So you move the report. Thank you, Christine. Have we got someone to second that? And those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, item 11. Glad you come tonight, Joe. Approve allocation of the 106 funds to facilitate development of affordable housing. Right.
Just pass to my colleague Graham Quinnell, who will present the report, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Joe. Yes, so I'll just briefly take you through the key points of the report. So this report is approving the allocation of Section 106 funds to facilitate the development of affordable housing, specifically a scheme at Cemetery Lodge in Bexhill. So 2 recommendations around the grant to Bexhill Community Land Trust being made, and that the Head of Housing and Community Services be granted delegated authority to agree the final terms of the grant in consultation with the portfolio holder. Our reasons for recommendation then around increasing the supply of affordable housing, set out in the Housing, Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Strategy, and of course the corporate plan, which commits us to delivering 400 affordable rented homes. The report makes a request to use our Section 106 funds, which are received by the Council from developers, often in lieu of providing on-site affordable housing, to use those funds to help to fund this scheme. The development is being led by Bexhill CLT, Bexhill Community Land Trust. There's a brief note here just to let you know, if anyone doesn't, that CLTs are those democratic, non-profit organisations developing land for the community. So, we do have funds in our community housing, our community housing fund grant pot, CHF grant, that could cover this 200,000 need. However, if we did use that, it would exhaust that CHF fund completely, and would mean we're no longer able to support further schemes as part of our community-led housing programme. The planned development at Cemetery Lodge is for affordable housing for local people, and the principle of developing the site in this way is long established. And I know you've previously received updates on the community-led housing programme. The council currently holds £377,000 in Section 106 planning obligations, which we can use to provide towards affordable housing, and it's that part of that sum which we seek to use towards this scheme. I will just to touch then on the national picture in terms of community-led housing. Funding for that is unclear. No new community housing fund grant has been announced. It's not clear within the sector if any will. There's no talk of it currently. So, as I say, we have the just over £200,000 in our community housing fund unallocated currently. However, we would not then be able to support any further community-led housing schemes as part of our programme. I think I'll leave the report highlights there, but happy to take any further questions or elaborate on any of that.
Thanks very much, Graham. So, in this scheme over the last how many years, we've over 250 homes have been created. Is that right? Looking at the table here, I can add them up quite quickly. But which obviously is providing homes for people, which is so important. And it seems a very, very good scheme that has actually covered quite a fair part of the district. Any questions of Graham? Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I agree with this scheme and using the money and everything else to provide housing. But the only sort of question I've got is obviously we as a council own this site. So if I know we're looking to provide social housing, and that's a good thing. But if the council was to sell the site, you'd easily get £500,000 for it. 6 units, less than 80 grand a unit, cheap. That's on the open market. Now, that's not going to cover our aggravation we've got of providing social housing. But is it not sort of a case that when a council sort of, if not offloads or sales or whatever, even if you're essentially what we're doing is giving it to the community land trust, is there not a value that has to be written in somewhere with the district value or something? I know of, when the county council sells sites for supermarkets or whatever, they have to argue the toss that they're getting the right money for it. So is there a value that Tony has to sort of put on it that then disappears, or am I just barking up a bush and getting in a confusion?
Tony, are you disappearing? Is that something you want to answer, Tony, or Graham, or even Ben? Yeah. Ben's just come straight in to save you on that one, Tony.
Councillor Osborne. Sorry, Councillor Osborne is right. We do have to demonstrate best value when disposing of any assets. However, there is a caveat to that in that if the asset's being disposed of for the benefit of the community. So we do so with such things like community centres, sports pitches, and so forth, where we don't seek best value because there's an overriding community benefit. So there's always that caveat that we can apply.
Councillor Jimmy Graham. Sorry. Who's Jimmy Graham? He's not even here.
I've got my football boots on, thank you. It's a couple of things. With the area, it's a very nice area and there'll be very nice properties there. It's been going on for a long time and I hope we can get closure on it, but what Paul said there is a very astute thing, and the people round there are not happy at all about the way it's been done. And I think we need houses, but it's how we do it. And there's a lot of houses being built in that area. Some of them a bit too much, but that sounds for other people. But I think we've got to tread carefully there. There's a few people that are not very happy. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Paul Cortell first, and then I can finish off.
I'd like to very enthusiastically support this project. I think there are two very positive factors. The first is that the Community Land Trust retains the social housing in perpetuity. And the second is that by using Section 106 monies, no taxpayer monies are involved. And I'm saying the second one because there's been a known Conservative who's been banging on about this on Facebook concerning a waste of taxpayers' money on this. And I'm sorry, he's got his facts wrong. This is being done with money from developers.
Right, thank you for that. Councillor Bayliss.
Yes, I would like to support this particular proposal. In Central Wards, we have a number of families that are, as we've discussed earlier, are in temporary accommodation. We need to increase our social provision. I think the Community Land Trust is a very, very worthwhile outfit. They're some really good local people with some real housing expertise on the Community Land Trust. So I would highly recommend it. There is just one thing. The name of the project is now called Parker House. And I think we should stop using the Cemetery Lodge moniker and call it now what it is, which is Parker House. And Parker House is Parker is the original architect of the Edwardian building that stood there, not the architect of the current design that's going to planning, but the original architect of the original Edwardian building, which actually won a prize and is celebrated, I think, as one of Bexhill Heritage's remarkable buildings of Bexhill. So that's my comment. Support, and can we change the name of it, please?
Right, thank you for those comments. Councillor Carl Maynard.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I just want to I don't know about respond to some of the comments that Councillor Courtell made, but I'm not sure who he's referring to, but I think he's factually incorrect because quite clearly, by the fact that we've foregone any capital from selling the site, which obviously would be in the region of £400,000 or £500,000 in the current market, firstly, there is a cost to the taxpayer of that because we've clearly foregoed that capital receipt. Moreover, the total cost of the project in real terms isn't 1.2 million, it's nearer 1.6, 1.7 million because obviously we've foregone forgoing that possible capital receipt. The other thing I'd just like to ask through you, if I may, Chairman, is could officers explain, not just for the benefit of councillors, but for the benefit of anybody watching on the webcast, exactly how the CLT loan is financed and how that loan is paid back? Because obviously within Section 8 of the report, we talk about just under £1 million in terms of a CLT loan. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Is that for you, Graham? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, from my conversations with the CLT, they have agreements in principle for loans from the market, from commercial loans from the likes of Triodos Bank, people like that, providing those funds. There'll also be further grant funding from Homes England towards the cost of the scheme as well.
Thank you. Any other questions of Graham? Terry, can I leave this with you?
Just winding up, really, I'd say that community land trusts are excellent because they do involve the community. People within the community identify the land. They band together, they look at the design. Also, they're in charge of what's known as the local lettings policy. So it does mean that it's houses that are in a position that suits the local area. They're designed by the local community and they're largely provided for the local community. So I think the whole community land trust movement is excellent. You could argue whether foregoing certain funds straightforward cash receipt for land as against the responsibility Rother has for providing houses in general. There's a trade-off there. It's a rather complicated one when you look at the new homes bonus and the 5-year land supply and all of those. It's very, very complicated. But I think local houses for local people where they have clubbed together, banded together and formed a community land trust within very specific financial boundaries. The way these things are governed is really quite well defined. I think that trumps any maybe even notional cash benefit that might have accrued to Rother when you look at the global cost of not having enough houses. So I think this is an excellent report, excellent move. Thank you, Graham, for explaining it to us. And yes, I'm very happy to move this.
Thank you. Second. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Right. Thank you for staying all evening, Tony. So we have the agenda item 12. To note this estimated financial outturn for 2022/23 based on expenditure and income to the end of quarter 2, 30th September 22.
Thank you, Chair. And we've definitely saved the best till last, I feel. So, as you just say that, pointed out, the report asked members to note the forecast outturn. There's one thing I should point out. Ordinarily, and what I'd like to try to do is get the report to go, and has done in the past, get the report to go to overview and scrutiny first, and then feedback from overview and scrutiny if there is any comes to Cabinet. But I've had to do it the other way around this time because, basically because of timing. Overview and scrutiny sat, I think it was on the 17th of October, which would have meant that basically taken almost the best part of a month off our ability to produce a quarter two forecast. So that's the reason it's done that way around, and I hopefully members will understand that was pretty much unavoidable on my part. So the headline figures, the forecast outturn is about £520,000 lower than the planned use of reserves, and that's an improvement of £180,000 on the previous quarter's outturn forecast. It does not include the impact of last week's pay award decisions, unfortunately. I will come to that a little bit later, if I may, Chair. Draft capital outturn is forecasted around about £28 million, which is again well below what we budgeted. And the council tax collection rate is virtually identical with 21-22, and I always mention this in our outturn reports. That's a good sign so far, but of course there are some challenging months ahead that may dent our collection rates. Business rates collection rate has improved by 14% from last year, and I will explain why in a bit more detail in a few moments. So revenue forecast is Appendix A refers. The main changes from quarter one are explained in paragraphs 3 to 15. I won't read through the report, Chair, because I'm sure members have already read it. But the main changes, we've acquired Buckhurst Place back in April, May, I think it was, and that's increased our rent income by about £563,000. Car park income forecast improved by about £217,000. In paragraph 10, recovery of housing benefit overpayments, that's knocked us by about £435,000. And again, this is not a new issue, and is one that I've reported to members several times in the past. It's as a result of our continued improvement in processing claims. It's a big number. The variance is actually quite small if you put it into context, because we process around about £20 million worth of housing benefit claims a year. So it's only 2% of that HB payments budget, but it's a budget that's very sensitive to large changes. We are reviewing this with colleagues as to how we can try and button down that forecast with a little bit more accuracy and button down the budgeting as well. But it is quite a difficult area to forecast, and it is a vulnerability for the council. Paragraph 14, financial stability programme. This year we're forecasting an underachievement of just over 500,000, which is a worry, not so much for this financial year, but is a worry going forward. And the financing cost budget, that continues to reduce because, broadly speaking, we've got enough internal cash to finance our current levels of capital expenditure, which are still quite low. So bring it in more simplistic speak, we don't need to go out and externally borrow more at the moment. Capital programme, Appendix B refers. We've redesigned the table from the previous quarter, so we're now picking up capital slippage rather than just reporting the in-year position. I still want to develop the capital reporting further so that we can show members whole project life costs, which won't actually change the underlying data, but it will give members hopefully a little bit more information and transparency around what's in there. Paragraph 24, if I just draw members' attention to that specifically, the capital programme continues to be reviewed for affordability and, more accurately, cash flow forecasts. And I think we're now in a situation whereby, certainly as a result of the rise in interest rates or borrowing rates recently, more complex schemes, larger complex capital schemes will need to be reviewing those very closely going forward in terms of affordability. That can include schemes not just in the programme, but any other potential schemes that may wish to be added to the programme, and that kind of links quite nicely to the debate that we had earlier around the leisure strategy. If I just try and illustrate the point about borrowing rates and the sort of sensitivity around it. Paragraph 24 explained that PWLB rates across the board were well over 5%. In actual fact, they were up to about 5.5% at the time that I wrote the report. Today's rates are about a whole percentage point less across the board. Now, that's good news in one sense, but it does demonstrate very well how volatile the situation is at the moment and how sensitive it is. And just to give a very, very rough figure, it depends on the life of the asset and the rate that we use, but broadly speaking, you can say that a 1% change in borrowing rates is around about £700,000 to Rother Council, so annual cost. So an increase of 1% costs us 700k more, and if it goes the other way, it costs 700k less. So the reason for me just to point to that is just to explain that it is a very, very delicate situation still at the moment. That brings into play again my comment earlier about reviewing capital, certainly the larger complex capital projects, more putting the microscope on those a little bit more, and basically trying to avoid taking out any new borrowing at the moment because the situation is so volatile. So we try to run with what money we have in our bank accounts. Collection fund performance. So as I say, it was a good news story about the council tax, that rates have borne up. I think I said during the pandemic when we reported on council tax collection rates, they bore up very well during the pandemic, during lockdown, and they're continuing to bear up well. But I think, and I've said this before, I think there is a real danger that going forward, those rates may struggle. Business rates figures, they are correct. The reason why we've got such a big lump in collection rate is because, if you remember, we had a lot of business rate reliefs that were awarded during the pandemic, and some of those carried on after the pandemic. In a nutshell, what we have now is our collection rates are broadly what they were pre-COVID levels. So it's all good news on that front at the moment. So to conclude, Chair, just to say something about the pay award. As I say, the forecast doesn't include the pay award because the council only met last week, so I had no basis upon which to put that in. It will cost us an additional £145,000 in the current financial year as a part-year cost. However, we do have a budget contingency that will absorb some of that. It won't absorb it all, but that is why we set up a budget contingency, was to allow for eventualities like this, and of course the general situation with inflation. We hadn't anticipated that inflation was going to be quite as high as this, so it has caused us a problem. But I would also like to refer members to paragraph 30 of the report. I put this in every single report, and we continue to do it. Finance will continue to work with officers to try and reduce areas of overspend and get us to within budget. So at this point in time, I'm fairly confident that the 22-23 position will land within budget, but the challenging months lie ahead over the next 6 months, so it could change quite dramatically. That's it, Chair. I think there's much else I can say to report, and I'll happily field any questions if there are any.
Any members got a question? And then I'll ask Kevin to... You got a question first? Kevin has a question first.
3 questions I thought I'd emulate Councillor Cortell. Tony, there's an extra cost of £100,000 on the local development plan. Is that what it was? Where has £100,000 come out of the woodwork from? Or maybe that's a question for Ben.
Hand over. Strike it, Ben.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so I mean, obviously the local development, the local plan development is sort of profiled equally over a period of years. Actually, where it is more of a bell curve, and we're just at the peak of that in terms of commissioning all of the expert works that we've needed to do in order to present the plan. So really, it's about bringing forward that evidence base, and that's why it's gone up significantly this year. But that means it will be a lot less next year. So because we'll be in the consultation and adoption phase next year. So it's sort of just more of a, whereas we allocate a certain amount each year, it actually goes on a bit of a bell curve.
Well, that's pleasing to hear, and I hope Lisa's got that in the minutes so we can hold you to that. So it's basically money brought forward from next year's budget. Have we had any effects yet on an increased interest rates on our investments, and do we have any indication of what sort of percentage we will be allowed to increase council tax by?
If I may, Chair, yes, we have the increase that we're getting on investment income from the change in interest rates is built into the forecast. I thought I'd alluded to actually in one of the paragraphs, but I may be thinking of the Treasury update that we do for Audit and Standards Committee, but we estimate that we're going to get probably an extra £200,000 in investment income as a result of the recent rise in interest rates, and it may well be more than that. The bank rate is forecast to go up again later this week. So we're quite confident that that's going in the right way for this particular financial year. To answer the second question, no indication whatsoever. We won't about the allowed increase in council tax, and we won't get that until the local government funding settlement is announced, which isn't going to be announced until usually around about Christmas time to give us a headache to have over Christmas. So we won't know that for another 6 weeks. Yeah.
Is that it, Kevin? Or is your third one coming up?
No, just a comment that and some quick scribbles on the back of a cigarette packet suggested that to make our books balance, our council tax would have to go up somewhere in the region of 40%.
I'll take Councillor Dixon's word for that, Chair.
Okay. Jonathan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions. Maybe I have 4, I'm not sure. Just in relation to Councillor Dixon's question on the local development framework, do we have the facility within the local government financing rules to actually amortise those sort of costs?
It's not something I've thought of doing. I probably not, but I'm happy to look into it. But I wouldn't have thought so because I can't see where a tangible fixed asset would be coming from the local development plan itself.
Okay, well, it's a question. This year, did we, and Joe's here, he can probably help on this question, for the housing that we've purchased to offset the cost of temporary accommodation, this year did we budget that saving in, or are we making a saving this year on that? Any idea what that might be?
I can't quantify in cost terms unless Joe can help me out. All I will say is we have, I think the temporary accommodation scheme hasn't so much enabled us to develop savings, but it's been more about cost avoidance. I think it's a fair.
Yeah, well, yes, there's a difference between what it was costing us and what it is costing us. But was that budgeted in this year, or are we making a saving this year?
That the business case was not a spend to save business case on temporary accommodation purchases. It's about cost avoidance. So it's about avoiding costs we would have otherwise realised if we hadn't made these investments.
So what is the difference in the costs that we've avoided and the costs that we've experienced?
I can show you the relative cost of placing a household in one of our accommodation units as opposed to another. But there are so many, there are myriad causes that drive the cost of temporary accommodation, not just the unit cost. So we're getting more people through the door.
The ultimate challenge of that was to reduce the cost by having our own accommodation as opposed to using temporary.
Yeah, I have those figures not to hand.
Okay,
but I can definitely give them to you.
I think
but it would be a relative.
It would be useful to know because that was what the project was about, yeah? And my third, which you sort of already know a little bit about, and you mentioned it, the overpayments, which I accept as a relatively small percentage on the total, is still absolutely quite a lot of money. When you look at, is that a figure approximately 435,000 that we have been experiencing ongoing for the last few years, do you think? Do we have been recording that in some way?
I'd have to go back and check that, Chair. It is a figure of that order.
So it's probably it's that 400,000 a year. That adds up to a lot of money, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is a figure of that order. Sometimes it's been the other way, and we've actually collected more than we've not collected, if that makes sense. I mean, yeah, I share your concerns. I share members' concerns around this particular budget. It's a concern for me as well, and we are trying to find ways of sophisticating our forecasts in that particular area and sophisticating our budget setting. But it is very difficult.
It's not a forecast, it's actually an overpayment.
It's the recovery of overpayment benefits.
Sorry, have I got that wrong?
As I understand it, and it's quite complicated, is that if you overpay benefit, and then you reclaim benefit, you're allowed to keep some of your overpayment. If you don't overpay, there's nothing to keep when you reclaim it. And the issue is that if claimants don't change their circumstances often, you don't overpay. It's where claimants move and change and we've already paid in advance and such like, and then their circumstances change and we claim, we can keep some of that. So I would imagine, and this is a little bit of a guess, that with COVID, people didn't move about so much and their circumstances didn't change so much, therefore benefit payments were quite regular, therefore mistakes or overpayments weren't made, therefore the little bit that we keep when we get it back, we didn't have. So actually for being efficient, and accurate, we earn a lot less money.
Correct.
Do you want that in writing, Jonathan, or not? Okay. Any other? This report is for noting. Kevin, anything to add?
No, only that obviously there's a glimmer of good news that the forecasting and budgeting is working generally, and we're seeing a better outcome. But of course, as Tony's alluded to, this is only the current situation, and the horrors that lie ahead aren't revealed in this particular report. But I'm sure we'll be seeing those in a future report of what's going to be happening in the next 2 or 3 years in the medium-term financial plan. I do share the concerns that there are some big numbers that seem to slip about a bit, and that is due, I think, to the various changes in lifestyle and issues since COVID, where everything's been thrown up in the air. So, at the moment, good news. I'm sure scrutiny will tear this apart at their next meeting, and we'll no doubt get to debate it again. But apart from that, Chairman, then I commend this to Cabinet.
Second, Jonathan, thank you very much. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. And I think I will say it's got 9.